Good morning everybody. I have a wedge in my hand. We are going to talk about bounce. You've heard that word a lot. I wanted to define it and describe it for you. We're going to talk about the grind on the base, or briefly about the grind on the base of the sand iron and why we do that. And we'll talk about why there is more bounce in a sand iron than a 7-iron. So let's define bounce. Bounce is, if I hold the shaft vertically here, bounce is the angle between the trail edge and the leading edge. With a sand iron, why do we have more bounce in our wedges than we do in a 7-iron? Essentially, it's because the shaft is shorter, so therefore it's going to come down more vertically. So therefore we need something that's not going to dig into the ground itself. So we can use that slide plane on the base of the sand iron here. So therefore we can slide it underneath the golf ball without you trying to move the handle backwards and forwards, or forwards for that matter. The opposite to bounce is when we move the handle too far forward, or the ball, therefore we can move the ball too far back in our stance, and we create the opposite to that bounce, which is what we call rake. And in our climate with broadleaf grass, creating rake into a grain is not a great idea. We'll either thin it, hit it too low because we'll have 60 degrees and turn it into sort of 50 degrees, or we will then hit the grass, maybe double hit the golf ball, maybe hit it 2 or 3 feet in front of us, maybe stub it completely and not get to it. So the idea of using bounce is being able to slide it. Sometimes we're going to hit the golf ball first. A lot of the times we're going to hit simultaneously ground and ball, and sometimes we're even going to hit the ground first to create a particular shot. That's a completely different skill set, so learn how to use use one shot first, and then we can go from there. Why then do we have different grinds on the sand irons? Essentially, if you get up close and personal with some tour players, you'll notice they'll start to grind off the base of the sand iron, and hence the reason why we call them grinds. Some are very flat, some are very broad, some are very round. This one has basically a triple grind here. And what happens is as soon as I open the face of this sand iron, that way the leading edge comes off the ground. So when we grind it off here, that means when we play a high flop shot, we're not going to have the sand iron sitting this way. We'll, generally speaking, lower the handle and open the face so we can slide underneath it a little bit better to create more height. So therefore we'll have different grinds on here to make sure it doesn't sit off the ground too much when we don't blade it across the green. So that's the reason why we do those kind of things with sand irons. That's the reason why we spend so much time with sand irons and looking at sand irons. And whether you have, or sand irons I should say, wedges, whether you have a 4 wedge setup, 3 wedge setup, 2 wedge setup, is depending on a lot of different things, with the gapping in between the wedges, with where you spend most of your time is basically inside 70 metres. So how we gap in between those, whether we need a 60 degrees that's turned into 59 or 61, 56, between 54 and 56 is a traditional sand iron, and then 50, 52, somewhere in there is a gap wedge, and then a pitching wedge. So depends on what's happening up the top end, whether you've stacked that top end because you're using it a lot, or whether we've stacked the bottom end because we use that a lot more. So what you feel comfortable with. Some people have a 4 wedge because they don't feel like that they can generate different shapes of shots and different lengths of shots. Some people have 3 wedges because they feel comfortable with that. Very rarely these days will you have a 2 wedge where you have a sand iron and a pitching wedge. You will always, if you do, we'll probably, the first one we'll put in there is a gap wedge, because there's, generally speaking, a big gap between the loft of the sand iron and the loft of the pitching wedge. That's why we have the gap wedge. So if you find that the pitching wedge goes too far sometimes, that the sand iron doesn't go far enough, that's the reason why. There's 4-degree increments, sometimes 3-degree increments, sometimes 5-degree increments between a pitching wedge 9-iron, 8-iron, 7-iron, and then they'll go back into 3-degree increments from 6-iron, 5-iron, 4-iron, 3-iron, if you still have a 3-iron or 4-iron in your bag. So that's the reason why we do that with wedges. I hope that makes sense. Once again, DM us, come in, talk to us in the shop if you require any more information, but that's why we spend so much time, and that's grind and bounce on sand irons. Take care, look forward to seeing you soon.